All right, welcome everybody. We want to welcome you to our evening webinar, Tales from the Trenches, where this evening we're going to talk about placement considerations for your child. This is a follow-up from our Lunch and Learn this month, where we also talked about placement considerations and decisions on how to make those. My name, again, is Tabitha Bellhorn. I'm the Director and ASTRA Coordinator here in Ohio for Ohio Hands and Voices. And also on the line, I have Janelle Frost, who is the Director and ASTRA Coordinator for Michigan Hands and Voices. We will be facilitating the webinar this evening. And we are going to take a back seat today and let two parents share their stories about deciding placement for their children and the process and how they did that. We have Marlise from Michigan and Cheryl from Ohio. So they will both be sharing their stories tonight. After that time, there will be some time for question and answers. So you can submit those questions via the chat box, or you can hold them until the end. 1 second. All right, and just a couple ground rules as we get started. I want to remind everybody that the webinar will be recorded, and we will post that online afterwards on our YouTube channel, so you can view it again, or you can share it with others who you think might benefit from it. And because of that, we are going to ask that you please don't use any school district names or names of school personnel. You will be muted during the formal presentation time, and then after that we will unmute you so you can make any questions, ask any questions you have. And yes, if you do have a question, please just let us know where you are from, because Ohio and Michigan do have some different state laws or state policies and procedures, so we want to make sure that we can give you the right information. And lastly, just please be sure to speak one at a time for interpreters and for captioning purposes. And so with that, I'm going to let Marlise go ahead and start to share her story. Marlise, I probably need to unmute you, or can you unmute yourself real quick?
I think I unmuted myself. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Good
All
evening,
right, great.
everyone.
So take it away.
Thank you. Well, good evening. I hope everyone had a good weekend. I wanted to take a few moments and share a little bit about our story. My son, who you see here pictured, is Lewis. He is 2.5, and in Michigan, students can enter an early special ed program, transitioning from the IFSP to an IEP, around 2.5 if the parents choose. So I'm going to be speaking about the transition that we are currently going through, since we have chosen that Lewis is going to make that transition now that he is 2.5. Do you want to go ahead and advance the slide, please? Just to share a little bit about our journey to having a diagnosis of deaf and hard of hearing. Our son was born and passed his newborn hearing screening. And then around 4 months of age, we started to notice some developmental delays with him. So he is technically deaf plus, and he entered early on through physical therapy and occupational therapy needs at 4 months of age. Right about then, and you'll see that's the picture on the left when he's doing some of that therapy work, we started to notice that he also wasn't typically responding to sounds. And so we asked that he go through some hearing testing, and we did that, and they told us that they suspected he had a hearing loss. And so they scheduled us, so they did ABR, and right about his first birthday, he was able to have that test, and then they came back to us, and what shocked us was that they said, yes, he does have a hearing loss. And we had prepared ourselves for that, but we thought it would be a conductive hearing loss because he had constant ear infections. What they actually told us was that it was a sensory neural hearing loss. And for us, that was a very big shock. It was probably a bigger shock than what we had experienced with some of the other disability diagnoses that had been shared with us in the past 6 months. And so we quickly said, okay, let's just tackle this head on. Let's go get him fitted for hearing aids. We'll figure this out as we go. And so within a week, we were in, as you see, getting him fitted for his first ear molds and hearing aids. And the team that we used here in Michigan has just been fabulous in really making sure that we've learned how to navigate the world of hearing aids and ear molds and the constant appointments. So from there, we then also got the diagnosis and the eligibility of deaf and hard of hearing for his special education plan. If you want to go ahead and advance, please. So what have we learned about navigating educational transitions within the past couple of months specifically is what I would like to really focus on now. So if you want to advance the slide. The first thing that we've learned is to really know your team. And for us, because our son is Deaf Plus, that team, it took us a moment and some time to really know who was that team. Because for us, it wasn't just the school-based early on teachers, but it included all of his doctors at the hospital. It included all of his outside therapists that we have, since we seek outside therapy also beyond the school system. It included some of our supports that we've had, our extended family, some of our friends, the people at Michigan Hands and Voices, and our guide by our side. It also included some members that we were starting to know within the deaf community and our deaf mentor. And then, of course, those online groups that you might have also sought out. For us, it really got to be a big team. And we had to start thinking, well, who can we talk with? Who can you really share freely with? Whose opinions do you value? Who really understands your child? And so when we said, well, know your team, you have to first know who's on your team, but you also have to know what part are they playing for you. Are they someone that is just simply providing services, or are they actually someone that they really know your child and know maybe more about how you're thinking about approaching the education? The biggest piece of advice that we got early on, right after our diagnosis, was that we always wanted to bring a friend to our team. And that was a very nice way of saying an advocate. And so the very first thing they said is just introduce this person as a friend so that they really become a team member and that they will be viewed more collaboratively before they ever need to have the need to advocate for you and for your child. And I think that really helped with this transition that we're going through right now, is really having our advocate have been a team member since we started this process, because they really then function more as a team member and not just an outside voice. If you want to go ahead and advance. The second lesson that we learned, and this was partly from some of our supports in the deaf community, from our advocate, and then also from some of the teachers, was to really make sure that we're contributing our parent input and doing that in ways that are prior to those meetings, and then also in ways that can kind of grow and change as your child is growing and developing. So the first way that we always have been advised to submit that input is through just a very short but simple written input. So we sit down, and if you even Google it, you can find a bunch of different samples. That's what we did. And we just sat down and kind of crafted what was it that we thought, who did we want people to know who Lewis was? And then what were our goals for the year? What did we think that was going to be important for him to really focus on, or for that plan to focus on? And we made sure to include data in this because we wanted it to be kind of taken more objectively and not always being thought of as something as subjective by the team. We also developed a communication plan. I know in some states this is a requirement. In Michigan it's not, but this was a living document, so that as we looked at how his communication was developing, we could really begin to look at different ways and supports that we might need. And this is actually something that we are continuing on in his IEP. And again, the benefits of it is that it's a living document, so it can grow and change. It's very similar to like a behavior plan that some students might have. If you want to go to the next one, please. So the third lesson that we had was that we started early. For us, we had to kind of think about, well, how were we going to do this and how did that work with my husband and I's jobs? For us, we started a little bit earlier than others might. So kind of think about what does your daily life schedule look like and how can you maybe fit in some additional meetings, visits, and then kind of back it up and create a timeline. So we asked our team at the annual IFSP meeting that we wanted to start considering what his needs were, and this was about when he was 1.5. We said that we really wanted to identify those needs within that meeting so we could then look at the placements. And at about 6 to 8 months of age, we asked that we look at all of the continuum of services. And most people that we talked with, either with the school system or in our larger team, were always wondering why. Why did we want to look at all of the placements? And partly what we told them is because we don't know. We don't know what's out there. We don't know what's going to be the best placement. In our hearts, we had a vision of where we thought he would go, but we also wanted to kind of be as objective as possible. And so we said, let's look at everything. So we identified all of those. That was just a community-based preschool. We also had a special ed preschool. We had a deaf and hard of hearing classroom that was for our school, intermediate school district. And then we had our state deaf school. And so we visited all of those different locations. And initially we didn't take Lewis with us. And then once we kind of had some time just learning about the classroom, we wanted to go back. And we wanted to see him and how he functioned within each classroom space. And so graciously they let us come back with Lewis, and we were able to conduct some observations. We asked those that were with us to complete like an observation form, and we wanted that to, again, create that objective data because we didn't want people to come back and say, well, this was what I saw and this is why I think that. We wanted some type of measure that everyone could use to guide their observations. And that particular form we got from Michigan Hands and Voices. So we were really grateful that we had something to use as data. And then we sat down and we actually had a staffing with all of our educational team, and we completed a chart. If you want to go to the next slide, please. This is the chart that we completed where we listed all of his needs, and then we started to say, does this particular placement actually provide that need or not? And so it got to be a Google document that we could then add in change as we identified additional needs for Lewis. But it made it very easy to begin to say, well, this placement completely not appropriate. It doesn't, it's not appropriate for him. It doesn't meet his needs. This one, it does. This one possibly with some supports. And so from there, it was a very easy process in the sense of selecting which would be the most appropriate and least restrictive environment for Lewis at this time. So if you want to go to the next page, or the next slide, the team selected that he would go to the school for the deaf, and we were ready to do that, and that decision was made in February. But we, as always with any decision, be ready for some hiccups. So the hiccups have come in just finalizing the plan, writing the IEP, getting all of those little parts of the plan that go with any placement kind of finalized and ready. So know that there are going to be some things that come up, and always try and think about what data you have and what the law says to help you navigate those hiccups. Because when they've arisen for us, if we can be more subjective, we've been more successful in kind of remaining calm and actually being a good advocate for our son and being able to find what's best for him and what's most appropriate. So on that note, I think it's Cheryl's turn to share her story.
Cheryl, it's Tabby. Can you unmute yourself? Give me 1 second and I will get Cheryl unmuted. All right, Cheryl, you should be able to speak now. Uh-oh, sorry guys, we're having a little technical difficulty.
Tabby, this is Janelle. Yes, her mic is still muted.
It's unmuted?
It's muted still.
Oh. Yes, because I unmuted the wrong one. Thank you. All right, Cheryl, are you there now?
I am here now.
Yay, okay. All right, Cheryl, why don't you share your experience with us, please?
Okay. Aiden is 14 years old now. He just turned 14 on Monday. Going back, I'm just going to go over some of Aiden's history real quick first. Aiden was considered a late diagnosis. He wasn't really diagnosed until he was about 2.5, and then we had him implanted bilaterally with cochlear implants at the age of 3.5. Then once he started school, he was going to regular mainstream school. Everything was okay until we got into the harder academics. I would say more towards if I would say 4th grade was probably when we started to see the struggle. By the time we got to 7th grade, that's when I was putting the mallet down and that's it. We've got to do something. Aiden has been, bilaterally implanted for such a long time now, and he always had a teacher of the deaf. He always had, the ASL support. He's never really been in a full ASL instructed program like he is now. Because when your child's implanted, you're told that the ASL is not beneficial for them and whatnot. I do strongly believe it's parents' preference. So moving along to red flags in current placement. As I was saying before, Aiden was about in 7th grade when we started seeing some lack of progress. His lack of progress really included mainly that he was in a very restricted environment. He was placed in a special ed program with all types of, typicals, non-typicals, or whatnot, but what he really needed was more of the typical students for him to progress. But because the academics were so much more advanced than where he was, there was a very big struggle with that. So, Aiden was also struggling with his identity. That was another red flag. There was a time my husband and I told him that he was deaf, and he cried because he didn't understand why he was deaf because he had implants. So partially, part of my decision making in Aiden going to where he is now, which is based he's at a deaf school now, was because I felt like he needed to really find who he was. He knows that, he's hearing, he knows that he's deaf, but he needed to figure out his deaf identity. He needed to learn about the deaf culture, and he needed to learn more about who he is. Aiden was also not fitting in with friends. He really struggled with making friends. Academically, he was so much further behind than some of the other kids. So there was a lot of headbutting going on, and the kids were so much more of a mature age than Aiden was. So Aiden really struggled with not making friends. And also the main point of the red flag was that he was not progressing. At the time when we moved him to his school now, which is the deaf school, Aiden was doing 4th grade work and going into the 7th grade, which I had a problem with that. I was very worried about where he would be, where his future would be. So moving along to learning more and getting support. I honestly have came across so many wonderful resources. Tabby is one of them. Tabby has always been, giving me lots of support and, helping me learn and kind of navigate my way. One of the things that I had done was I got some outside testing done to kind of rule out any other possibilities. I wanted to kind of put all my ducks in a row before I presented the school with my plan, and I wanted to rule out everything possible that there was, anything that was underlining. So I would definitely say getting some outside testing done just to kind of back up, just to support your decision making. Another one was learning what Aiden wanted. Did Aiden want more of an ASL program? Did he want more of a hearing program? I really didn't know what Aiden wanted until we went on school tours and I took him with us. And the other thing was finding where Aiden fits in. Where does Aiden fit in exactly? Does he fit into more of a mainstream school? Does he fit into more of a auditory verbal school? Or, does he fit, really, technically there's really nowhere Aiden fits. Aiden kind of falls in between the category of needing more of just a full ASL program versus a auditory verbal program. So I would definitely say that Aiden is loving where he is now. And when we went on a tour and we toured the school, as soon as he walked in, and it was like you knew that was where he wanted to be. He was very happy, and he knew a lot of people from OYO camp. So we already knew on that tour that was where he was going to go. Let's see, identifying Aiden's needs. You can go ahead and move the slide, please. Identifying Aiden's needs. Now, because Aiden kind of fell in that category of in between, whether he needed a mainstream school, deaf school, or an auditory verbal kind of setting, it was kind of tricky. So I had to really do a lot of research, kind of figure out, basically looking at his IEP, what his needs were and what he would benefit from, all types of schools. So we ended up going with the ASL approach. Aiden is a very visual learner. So he has been in an ASL program fully for this whole school year, so he's the whole 7th grade year now, and Aiden has progressed so much doing the ASL program. Now Aiden still talks, hears, and signs, but he is so in love with the deaf culture, and this is 100% where Aiden belongs. So convincing the team. This was a struggle. Where do I begin? When we went into Aiden's IEP meeting, before we decided to find placement for him, I told the school, I want placement. He is not fitting in here. He's falling behind. There's got to be something else we can do. So my next step was I consulted with advocates, of course, Ohio Hands for Voices, a couple of interpreter friends that I have, just kind of putting the puzzle pieces together and figuring out how I can approach this. The next step I did was I consulted an attorney because I wasn't really sure what my rights were, what Aiden's rights were. So he kind of helped me guide myself, and navigate through the laws and the rules and what type of wording to say to get Aiden that placement he needed. I have been asking for Aiden to be placed in a different school for 2 years. This was a 2-year struggle for us. Our school district kept saying that they could support Aiden, that they could, do everything 100%. I had to pretty much prove that they could not, they couldn't handle him. They couldn't teach him. He wasn't being taught appropriately, and there was too much that Aiden needed, and he was falling further and further behind, which was the biggest problem. I mean, he was already going into 7th grade and only doing 4th grade academics, and I basically broke it down to them like, look, by the time he's a senior in high school, he is going to graduate as a freshman. Where is he going to be in the future? What life planning, like what life skills has he learned? Like, where is he going to go from there? Is he going to be able to go to college? All of those were huge for me because I feel like Aiden is very capable of doing the work and learning if he was just taught correctly. So then I just kind of put all my ducks in a row and basically gathered up all my information, and then I presented my case to the district. I walked into the special ed director's office, and I basically just said, this is what we need. This is where Aiden needs to go. This is what it's going to cost you. This is what it's going to cost me. Once I kind of laid it down into specific terms, I did all the research myself, and I literally just handed him all my research and said, now all you have to do is send a letter requesting placement. So after that, he agreed to look into it with me. I strongly believe that you should definitely take your special ed director or coordinator, however they're labeled, with you to a tour, because I feel like they need to see that environment as well. So he went along with us for the tour, and mind you, my son has been in that school ever since he was in kindergarten, and as soon as he got into that environment, he was in his own world. He told me he's never seen my child sign like he did that day, and how happy he was. He knew that was the right placement for him. And I also had a lot of support from our superintendent. Our superintendent had, a student in his past when he was a principal at a school that had really struggled. She was a deaf student, and she really didn't, she didn't really excel. And, basically she has been struggling her whole life because she didn't get what she needed in school. And he said that he always thought about her. So, my child was very, special to him. And our superintendent actually went down with me and toured our school because he was so excited for the placement there. So I will say it was a struggle in the beginning getting him there, but I think once you open everybody's eyes into why this is best for your child, I think that they really can kind of see the environment and see your child in that environment. And I guess it's just working together in a calming manner and, giving them as much resources as you can and doing a little bit of research yourself and giving them, whatever they need to, call, the numbers to call or whatnot. Sometimes when you do that, you get better results. Aiden started the school year at his school, and we just did his IEP, and this was the first time that I did not need an advocate. I you know, when I was going through the IEP, it was very detailed, and this was probably one of the first ones I was actually satisfied with, that I did not have to tweak. I did not have to take any wording out. I did not have to modify, and I did not have to study it very lengthily. This was probably the best IEP he's ever had, because they are meeting his needs. And, you know, one of the things that, you know, Aiden always had was extended school year services. Well, you know, this is the first year that Aiden does not qualify for extended school year services, because his test scores at just this school year has improved so much that he does not qualify for any services. So with that being said, I'm very happy with the placement. Aiden is doing fantastic. He's happy. He's growing, and he absolutely loves school now. And I mean, there's a little bit of hiccups, and, you know, there's pros and cons to some placement issues, or, you know, some placements, but you got to kind of weigh your pros with your cons and do what's best for your child. And that's what we did. So happy to say he's doing very, very well, and the struggle was definitely worth it. And that's all I've got.
Great. Thank you, Cheryl.
You're welcome.
Thank you to Marlise. I am going to open this up for questions. If you give me 1 second, please.
Okay.
Okay. Can you see my screen again?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. All right. I have everybody unmuted. I know we've got two great parents here who have great stories to share and great insight. So I'm going to open up the floor to everybody out there who may have questions about your process and your placement decisions, to get some advice from others. So please feel free. Please just introduce yourself beforehand, and remember to let us know what state you are from, please. This is Tabby. I do have a question that I would like to ask Marlise. As I was listening to your story, I loved that after you did all the tours, that you made a chart so you could compare each of your placement options. I was curious, who did you make that chart with? Did you make that chart with your early intervention provider, or did you do that through your school district, or both?
So in Michigan, our early intervention provider is through our school district. So when we get early on services, it's actually the school that comes out to do it. So it was our deaf and hard of hearing teacher suggested that we use this approach. And the other team members had never done anything like this, and so they were a little apprehensive. What we decided to do is there was a lot of conversation of who should be at that meeting. And we knew who we wanted. We wanted to definitely have people that were those team members that we confided in. And we would prefer that other team members who maybe only consulted about Lewis or never came and actually saw him had more of a limited voice. And so what we decided was at the IFSP, we opened up the conversation of who would want to come and participate, and we just left it open. And it ended up being that his case manager, the deaf and hard of hearing teacher, and myself, and then Dan, my husband, were at the meeting that made that chart. And then from there, that chart went back to the rest of the early on team, and they added and tweaked things and put their input in. And then it went to the special ed director. And we had a staffing meeting that had all of his early on team members in attendance, as well as our advocate, Janelle. And we talked through the chart and what was the actual placement that looked like it would be the least restrictive. From there, then we decided to sign a read and actually pursue a placement at the location that we thought would be the least restrictive.
Great, thank you. In Ohio, we are different. Our early intervention providers are not under the Department of Education. So those are two separate entities, which was why I was curious. So it sounds like that definitely helps with cohesion between moving from EI to preschool. So thank you.
Yeah, we did talk about it informally with a lot of those outside team members that I mentioned that you might have. Again, trying to know what was going to be our input. So that's how maybe for those of you in Ohio, you can easily come and just bring all of the different inputs or people that you work with and have that be part of your actual parental input piece.
Right.
So, Tabby, this is Janelle. I do have kind of an observation or something I'd like to share with everyone. As I was listening to both Marlise share her story and then Cheryl share hers, I started thinking about my own journey with placement options for my son. My son is 16 years old, so we've had several years of thinking about this, and I can say that in my mind, processing this throughout the years, I've thought of placement more of not a building, but services for my child. So that way, when we were looking at the IFSP or IEP, you know, tailoring it to his needs particular, and so that wherever he was, it was going to fit him and not him fit into a program or a specific building or something, you know, in that thought. So, and I know every year, now he's 16, every year at the IEP, we revisit at the end of it the placement or really the services. Where are those needs going to be met? And even though my son attended a total communication program, I can tell you there has been very few years that his actual, what we call placement, was the same from the year before. It has really changed almost every year of where these services were going to be provided and what fit him. So I think it was very helpful that someone had told me that early in the process, that thinking of it as services and not particular a building. And I think Cheryl kind of, it's her story, you could see that kind of unfolding, that her son didn't really fit into a specific place. So I thought that was useful along the years as we moved throughout different actual buildings, but thinking of it as the services and where he's going to be at. And even next year, it's already going to look different, and we already know that. So kind of in our minds to think of services instead of an actual building that you're going to be at.
I think that's a great point, Janelle. Thank you. And even I have heard, just to follow up on that, from a special education attorney who's, I had worked with a family who filed due process. And when you file due process, what is called a stay put rule is invoked, in which typically is understood that the child will continue to stay in the same building and receive the same services that they were before your due process case was filed. But she actually explained to me that is not the case. It's exactly as you described, Janelle. It's the actual services. So the services will not change, although with some physical building placements, it's hard to provide the same services or placement in a different physical building. So that's a great point. Everybody's so quiet this evening. Does anybody else have questions for Marlise or Cheryl? I know placement decisions are not easy, and placement decisions, excuse me, are not always permanent, whether it's, as Janelle explained, the services or if it's the actual building too. And those can change every year. They can change over time as our children grow and their needs and wants and desires change as they get older and have more input into the IEP process.
This is Janelle. I want to add one more thing that we did touch on through the last Lunch and Learn, and that is something that Marlise also said and pointed out that, you know, she visited, or their family visited these actual placement options by themselves and then with their child. And I'm going to add one more, is to make sure that everyone on the team is familiar with those different options as well. Several different IEPs that I've been in, that has been a problem when the team would be discussing which options was best, but there were team members that hadn't visited that school or that program in like 10 years. So they really couldn't have a good objective look at it. So making sure that everyone on the team has seen the other programs or the other options is really important if they are truly in that part of the IEP team discussing which one is best.
Okay, I can't even get into her ear. It's just a temperature checker, okay?
Okay.
It won't hurt you, we promise, okay?
Looks like, is there a question in the chat box, Janelle?
Can we see that?
I have a statement from Anthony. It says, placement is difficult, trying to get the best for your child, yet keeping within the guidelines. We are blessed that both districts have agreed with what we felt was a good placement. That's wonderful, Anthony. So a lot of times it is difficult to get your district to agree on a placement, and it does take a lot of convincing, like Cheryl said.
But it's Janelle, if you'll hold on a second, I'll take care of the background.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, Janelle.
Oh, I'm back. Hi.
Okay,
yeah.
Go ahead.
All right. Yeah, so Anthony was saying that it was, he's had a blessed that both districts have agreed with what they felt was a good placement, and that's wonderful. Being an ASTRA coordinator and working on several IEPs, that is really very rare. I don't know if Tabby can agree with me, but it typically takes a lot of data to prove if you are going to be moving out of the district. And so I'm glad Anthony had a fairly good experience with that, as it does happen too.
It does. Yes, it does.
This is Marlise. I had just one point to follow up with Janelle's. So with our son and them deciding to place, that the most appropriate placement was at the School for the Deaf, the school district has asked that we revisit that decision at the end of the school year. So I think it's definitely to emphasize Janelle's point that if they are going to be looking at other programs, that sometimes the districts will want you to come back and revisit that decision to really make sure that it is still the most appropriate placement. And so really making sure that you have that data that maybe helped make it show that it was the most appropriate placement, that it's maintained, and that you are really monitoring these placement options, because sometimes that might be on the district or the school district's minds while it's not on yours.
Thank you, Marlise. That is so true. It is a full-time job for us parents to continuously collect data, because the more that you have on paper and even videos, I know that's been very useful for some parents to actually use videos for data, the better, because the team members, not all of them are there every day, with your child, and they need to see something and to have that available. And yeah, they're going to revisit it every year, at least once through the IEP or even sooner. All right, Tabby, I think, is it time for us to move on with this?
Sure. Yeah, go right ahead.
All right. So as you see on the screen, we have ASTRA programs, which is a program through Hands and Voices, and both Michigan and Ohio do have ASTRA programs, and ASTRA stands for Advocacy, Support, and Training Programs. And with that, there's two things that we do. The first one is we offer Basic 1 trainings for parents and professionals specific to students that are deaf and hard of hearing. And so this is a full day, 8-hour training that we can provide that no other organization does. There's a lot of advocacy trainings out there, but this one is specifically to deaf and hard of hearing students. So in Michigan and Ohio, we do have some trainings coming up, so I wanted to make sure everyone was aware of those. And Michigan has one on April 28th, and that's going to be in Grand Rapids. And so that'll be a full day training on a Saturday. And Ohio will have one on June 2nd, and I don't know where that is. I don't know if, Tabby, you can let everyone know.
That will be in the central Ohio area, so around Columbus.
Okay, wonderful. So that'll be a full day training for professionals and for parents. So it's really very open to anyone interested in learning more specific to deaf and hard of hearing children. And there's so much information that is shared regarding the laws and rules. Both in Ohio, they'll go over their state rules, and in Michigan, we will go over our state rules. And then there's a lot of practical things that we do around the working or figuring out your IFSP or IEP, a parent plan, or parent report, a communication plan, so you can really get some great information to move on, no matter where you are. If you're just starting out and your child is just a baby all the way up to in the teens, you can still utilize this. So those are coming up. And the second part of the ASTRA program is to have an actual advocate work with you. And I know both Marlise and Cheryl mentioned that several times, that having an advocate was very important to them. So you can contact Ohio Hands and Voices or Michigan Hands and Voices, and the contact information is on the screen if you would like to have an advocate work with you. And I want to stress that advocate can be someone that doesn't necessarily go into the meetings with you. I have several of our advocates that work with parents just behind the scenes. So they may be looking at your draft IEP or your parent report or your communication plan, and they feel confident in their team, and they just want someone to take a look at that and see if they're in the right direction or have some questions about. But we are all trained to go into the meeting with the parents as well. So I do advise, if you don't have an advocate, to contact Ohio Hands and Voices or Michigan Hands and Voices just to get help with even behind the scenes. Is there another question, or? Let's see. Oh, we have.
I'm not sure, Janelle. Can you see it?
Okay, yes, I can see it. So Anthony replied, "Going to the training is well worth your time. It prepares you very well for your IEP and knowing your rights." That's for sure. I think I've been to several advocacy training, and no matter which one I've gone to, They've all been very broad and general, and as a parent of a child who's deaf or hard of hearing, this training is so very specific to our kids. So it is one of a kind, and I do suggest you at least go to one basic one training throughout the year. I think Ohio has more than one a year. Michigan, we do have 2 trainings a year. Tabby, do you do 1 or 2 a year?
So far, we have been doing 1 per year, and it's generally in the summertime.
Okay. And this is Janelle, and being that, Michigan and Ohio is fairly close, I know I've gone to one of Ohio's trainings, and Tabby actually has come to one of ours in Michigan. So, we can always try and catch one of those. Columbus is not too far for some of us here on the call. So, and that Grand Rapids might not. Yeah, Grand Rapids might not be too far for some of you in Ohio. Yeah.
And last year we had our Astra Level 1 training in Cincinnati, and we had folks from Indiana and Kentucky coming. So please feel free to join us. And Ohio, please feel free to go north too.
Absolutely.
Okay, this is Tabby. Thank you, Janelle. Do we have any final thoughts, questions, comments from all of you? I want to thank all of you for joining us this evening, and a special thanks to Marlise and Cheryl for sharing your stories. I know parents can learn so much from other parents, so your information is invaluable. Thank you for your time and your experience. Janelle, do you have any final thoughts?
This is Janelle. I just think that this topic in a whole can be very frustrating if you're not prepared. I love listening to both Marlise and Cheryl and their experiences, and I know as we all go through it, you learn. You learn along the way, but being prepared is huge, and getting onto some of these, like this call tonight is going to be very helpful. And please reach out to Tabby or myself if you do have some issues and problems, because looking back, I wish I would have had contacts like I do now, and it may be a simple call that changes everything. So please reach out to us if you need us for anything.
Absolutely. Excuse me. Well, thank you all again for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and end our meeting. Thank you again. Oh, Janelle, we have our next Tales from the Trenches will be in May. Do you have that date handy by chance?
Oh, I will look it up real quick. Let's see.
It is May 6th.
May 6th.
And that will be at 7 p.m. again. It's a Sunday evening again. So please mark your calendar. Registration is open for that too. Please feel free to join us. And our next Lunch and Learn will be held on April 11th. So we hope to see you there too. Janelle, I think there's another question or comment. Can you grab that real quick?
This is Janelle. Anthony says, thank you, ladies. So thank you, Anthony, for being on the call as well, and all of you that have joined us this evening.
Thank you.
Have a good night.